I came across a Discord post by Mercurial sharing a video, The Truth About Blight's J-Flick, an honest examination, where a creator I've never seen before, named Ascension, goes over all the positives of Blight's J-Flick, overcomes some objections, and explains why it should be in the game. And big shout out to Mercurial because they took some time out to have a dialogue with me, because prior to their post and prior to me watching this video, my opinion on J-Flicks could be summarized as J-Flick bad. But having watched the video, it actually overcame some of my objections to the J-Flick. But while the video says case closed and seems to wrap everything up nicely, I still had some questions and some things that I would like more information on. So I'll dive right into it. I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. I'll show the videos, both the parts I would like more information on. There's a couple minor points where I have a difference of opinion that I think is worth mentioning, and then I'll talk about the stuff where I'm not quite convinced, but because I never even considered J-Flicks before, I'm really open to more information on it. So my objections to the J-Flick before this dialogue and before watching the video could be summarized as followed. I believed it made Blight too overpowered. I felt that because of a controls barrier, it guaranteed 1 to 4 free hits during a match, because not everyone has the ability to do this exploit, and so you would never look out for it in the beginning of your first chase against a Blight J-Flicking. So that just gives them a free hit, which can net them a lot of free momentum and map pressure. And then I did feel it's an exploit, not a tech. I felt it sometimes eliminates counterplay for survivors during chase, and then it feels bad. And then I felt it didn't take any skill. After watching Ascension Who's video, I decided that it does take skill, so it overcame my no skill objection. He actually has a brilliant solution to that controls barrier and the free hits problem that I had a problem with that we'll go over. And then I'm still on the fence about the exploit, not a tech, and I'll get into that. I do still feel it sometimes eliminates counterplay, and it still kind of feels bad, and I do think it makes Blight overpowered. And I'll just say really quick that Ascension seems like beyond just an overall good guy. He seems very knowledgeable and skilled at the game. Certainly a better Blight player. Probably an overall everything better at DBD than I am. And so I'm not going to even contend on the skill front, although I've got enough game knowledge and game experience that I think it's worth talking about J-Flicks. And I'm going to move a little fast because the video I originally made was 30 minutes long, so I'm going to try to summarize a lot more of what he says faster, but I'm going to link his video in the description, so if I go too fast and accidentally mischaracterize something he says, go ahead and let me know in the comments and I'll go look and acknowledge it, because I don't want any kind of miscommunication to kind of muddy up a good dialogue about J-Flicking.
I'm here today to set the record straight and explain why the J-Flick is a phenomenal example of great accidental game design, why the whole exploit argument is flawed, and why it's a healthy mechanic for both sides of the game.
Also, I forgot to say, go ahead and watch this video anyway, because it's very articulate, well-spoken, persuasive, and dare I say, banger editing. I love the whole, like, Blight in a courtroom animations. I don't know where he got it, but man, that's awesome. So, oh yeah, but why'd I show the clip? So his thesis was that it's great unintentional game design, and it's healthy for both sides, and it's not an exploit. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to start summarizing. This is where I could get into dangerous territory, and like I said, please feel free to watch this video and let me know if I don't explain it well. But his beginning argument for it not being an exploit is that anyone with a high enough DPI can do the Blight J-Flick. And so because there's no third-party software and you just turn your mouse up and then swing it fast, it's not an exploit because you can do it with the base game. And I have a difference of opinion here, because technically you can still do an exploit, and there are things in games that are considered exploits, whether or not you need a third-party software to do it. A good example of that would have been when survivors used to be able to hook glitch and crawl under a hook survivor and not get picked up. It was super scummy. Anyone with a W key could do it, and I refused to do it. And that's kind of what an exploit is technically, so it is worth mentioning that. This next bit is sort of just a clip of McLean behavior, a streamer I actually watch as well, just explaining the technical jargon for exactly how the J-Flick works. It just backs up his point that anyone with a high sensitivity can do it. But it is worth mentioning that while any clip of McLean's thoughts on the health or balancing of a J-flick aren't in this clip. He does say something kind of telling, which is he refers to players with a good enough gamer chair can do J-flick, and usually people don't bring up gamer chairs unless they're being derogatory or derisive in some way to a game mechanic or play style.
But if you've got a really good gaming chair and you can turn your dude like 180 degrees or something in one frame before that look at direction modifier is updated, yeah, you can actually turn currently further than is intentional. Now, when I look at discussions...
Because swinging during a lethal rush forces you to fatigue afterward, throwing out a J-flick is a risky play that can be punished by a good survivor. Blight is far from reliant on flicks. 9 times out of 10, you're better off out-positioning your opponent by bumping in the exact right spots and then going for a straight-on hit. Flicking is only really useful if you've got a read on your opponent and know that they're not going to try any funny business. If the survivor moves out of the way even slightly, your J-flick simply won't connect, and they'll get away for free while you recharge tokens. Good survivors will catch on and adapt to your playstyle. It's only a matter of time. Once this happens, you'll be forced to rely on playing safe and guaranteeing hits instead of flicking. A J-flick you know is coming is the easiest thing in the world to dodge.
So this right away overcomes some of my objections of it not taking skill and a little bit of my objections of the overpowered, which we'll get back to, but he's saying that the only survivor that's going to get hit, well, only good survivor that gets hit with a J-flick is a survivor that doesn't see it coming, which lends back to my original concern, which is you don't know going into a match whether a Blight even can J-flick, so you begin the loops optimally, running as though he were playing normal Blight, and then bam, you get hit with a flick. And he says, oh, but, you know, they'll adapt, they'll overcome that next time you try it, but the damage is already done. You ended a first chase really fast sometimes by doing an M1 into a rush, landing a hit they didn't even know you were capable of. And the other question is, if the main power of the J-flick lies in the element of surprise, and the element of surprise comes from the fact that it's an exploit that 1, not everyone has access to, and 2, not everyone knows about or even wants to do if they know about it, I wonder, and this is just kind of an off-topic question, but would the J-flick still be powerful if it was implemented into Blight's base kit, and if it was something we were always looking out for? That could be actually an argument in favor of J-flicks. It could reduce the power of J-flicks, the soft power it has, just from its unpredictability at the start of a match.
Once the Blight flicks, he's pretty much committed to moving in a certain direction and swinging in a certain spot. All you need to do is not be in that spot. It's really as simple as that.
I mean, I actually agree with this point 100%. He's saying the Blight's trying to be in a spot where he can hit you and don't get hit. And that's actually advice I give for anyone playing Survivor. The killer's going to try to hit you and you need to try not to get hit. Like, I don't see how it pertains to J-flicking, but in general, I do think that's really solid game advice.
I find that good survivors are often easier to chase as Blight, because they're so predictable in how they loop killers. They always stick to the same methods and tactics that already work for like 90% of killers. So when you have a killer like Blight that breaks the mold when it comes to killer, many of them, well, they find themselves on the ground. Blight isn't just another M1 killer. You need to loop him like you would loop a really good nurse. Be unpredictable and bait out rushes and flicks.
This is a minor difference of opinion of mine, but having played with and against average to good survivors, I don't think anyone has a problem with J-flicking because they have to play differently and they don't want to play differently. I mean, tons of survivors are really good at switching up their play style depending on the killer power, and I don't think that's... I mean, it seems a little bit like he's implying that, oh, people don't like J-flicking because they don't want to adapt, but we actually have fun adapting. Well, most of us do. We like variety. I don't think that is what the issue is here.
Competitive DBD is a great example of strong killers and strong survivors going toe-to-toe. All of these Blight players, they know how to flick, and survivors are just as, if not more, aware. Why isn't Blight constantly landing J-flicks and stomping on survivors over there?
Again, not a huge deal, but I do have a minor difference of opinion here because I've watched other people watching competitive DBD, and there's what I feel are very strong killer powers that the community generally agrees are very strong, such as Spirit's Phase, especially with cooled add-ons, Nurse's Blinks, especially with add-ons, Death Slinger, again, especially with add-ons. I don't think anyone would call these abilities weak, but survivors do bait them out or not get hit by them. And in my personal opinion, I don't think that an ability getting juked or baited or predicted now and then is evidence for an ability being weak or regular powered or underpowered. That's just my opinion. It's also worth mentioning that in competitive, all these survivors, even out the gate, know that the Blight can J-flick, and so that the Blights are J-flicking without the element of surprise we talked about earlier, but they're still doing it. And I don't think any Blight player would even attempt a J-flick if it wasn't landing some of the time. So I think that it's definitely giving him at least, if not an edge, then certainly an option he didn't have before, especially because earlier Ascension said 9 times out of 10, a Blight's best option is to just bump optimally and go for a non-J-flick hit. But if people are out here in competitive throwing out J-flicks, that means that they're landing sometimes, and that means that maybe they're a little bit, powerful, Alright, this is actually my favorite part of his argument and the one that I agree with 100%. So I talked earlier, we haven't really, sorry, let me back up. I still haven't fully concluded if the J-flick is too powerful or not, but I have concluded it's certainly powerful because of its unpredictability, and that unpredictability in large part comes from some players not even being able to do it, especially on console where you literally cannot J-flick. That exploit is not available to you. And so he explains, hey, maybe that's not a problem with J-flick. Maybe that's a problem with not enough diversity or access to controls. And I would actually take this a step further than Ascension did and say, instead of giving mice and keyboards to console players so that they can do the exploit, again, if Blight J-flicking is healthy for the game, I would actually reduce the sensitivity needed to J-flick myself and just put it into an intentional base kit, which is not an idea that Ascension suggested, but I'm taking his idea further. And if we end up deciding that J-flicks are good for the game, then I think that actually that would be the route to go. And don't leave it as an exploit that you need high DPI to do, just rework it into his kit, But, I mean, even aside from whether they make it base kit, I mean, mouse and keyboard would be really cool to have for console. Here, I'll just let Ascension take this one away.
Plenty of games offer mouse and keyboard support on console. Why shouldn't Dead by Daylight? Let this video be a petition to add mouse and keyboard support to console. It goes so far into balancing this game across platforms for many reasons beyond flicking.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. I couldn't agree more. Like, whatever else happens with J-flicking, I'd love to see some mouse and keyboard support for console. It's way cheaper to buy a mouse and keyboard and just start moonwalking and having fun and throwing better hatchets than it ever is to, buy a whole new computer.
As for J-flicks being unintended, and therefore an exploit, many techniques that exist in DBD are unintended by the developers and could be considered exploits in their own right. Survivor techniques such as 316 and window teching are clearly unintentional.
So, minor difference of opinion here as far as this relates to J-flicking. The window tech specifically where you could merge with the killer's hitbox got patched out. I know, because I'm a filthy scum and I tried it not too long ago. You could still try to trick them by blocking line of sight, but you can't actually merge through them there. So, I mean, that would be something that's gone, and while it was cool and again good to know because you had to know it, I think it's healthier for the game that window teching is gone.
Killers such as Hag can bind the teleport action to the scroll wheel.
Okay, I really don't mean to nitpick too much, but it just needs to be said, and I don't want to ruffle too many feathers here, but binding Hag's teleport to scroll wheel isn't the same as Blight's J-flick, because the whole point of Blight's J-flick is it allows him to do something he couldn't do previously. Binding the scroll wheel to Hag's teleport is more like struggling on a hook to scroll wheel. It doesn't let Hag do anything she couldn't do before. It just lets her do it easier. I mean, without rebinding the key, it would be a hassle, but you could take your pinky and just spam the control button. Like, the mouse wheel down gives you quality of life, but it doesn't give you any new abilities, and that's why it's not really comparable to the J-flick, in my opinion.
Myers can use his stock ability to face their would-be body blockers. Pig players, they can follow a survivor with an active head trap, stay crouched, and basically force them to die to the trap.
Alright, just a couple things, because I partially agree here and partially disagree. Myers' stock losing collision, I think, I'm not sure, I'd have to ask a dev, I think it's so that he can't body block a survivor and get a full stock off them, because it's so powerful, more powerful than body blocking with a billy chainsaw, because you're not just exposing that survivor, you're exposing the entire team. And I thought him losing collision was to prevent that from happening. And then as far as the survivor body blocking, just based off that clip, I don't think the survivor was interested in body blocking, because I don't think that survivor wanted to give that Myers free juice. And if the survivor did want to body block, you actually move faster than Myers during his stock, so he can't use stock to just phase through you. So I don't think that's a good example that's comparable to the J-Flick. As far as Pig's hat traps go, I do agree that it's a lame design. I don't like it. I don't use her hats that way, except I'll admit, one time when I was getting to rank 1 on Pig way back in the day, I did catch someone's Oran barbecue. They had teabagged me, and I may or may not have camped the box they were running to, but other than that, kind of like the J-Flicks, in my opinion, I don't play Pig that way. And as a final thought, I don't think that's good game design. I would like to see a lot of things change with Pig, but even if it was an example of, well, hey, this is a terrible thing intended by the devs, so even if J-Flicks are bad, let's go through with it. I'm never of the opinion which would be like, oh, there's already bad things, so why not more bad things? Because I don't really, I'd like less bad things, basically, not more.
Do I even need to mention the hatchet hitboxes on Huntress?
Huntress comes up a lot in this video, and there's a lot of comparisons made between Huntress and Blight, but I'll hit this particular one, and I want to come back to it later. But as far as Huntress hatchet hitboxes go, it's true they're not intuitive to a new player. The first times you do get hit by those, it's frustrating, and that is comparable to someone, if J-flicking is a new thing, you're like, oh, I didn't know he could do that, that's frustrating. I think that would be comparable to the Huntress hitboxes. But as far as intended game design, the hitboxes are consistent. You can actually play around them. It always looks weird because of a little bit of a server desync, but while the hitbox is like a box, an actual box, and the hatchet is more like a rectangle. So it is weird at first getting used to that, but it is intended game design that you can play with and play around. So it's not quite, I don't think it's a good example of unintended game design, because I think anyone who's played fighting games or Dark Souls or whatever, hitboxes are very intentional. This part I agree with 100%. He's saying just because something's unintended doesn't mean it can't be a beloved part of a game, and he uses an example of Street Fighter where people discovered combos. It wasn't intended, but they kept it in the game, and I actually come from a game that is nothing but unintentional game design, and that is Super Smash Bros. Melee. Every tech in that game is some unintended game design, from the L cancels, the wave dashing. I mean, everything that you do in competitive Smash is an unintentional game design that's beloved by its community. But the reason I like those, and I'm still on the fence about J-Flicks, is going to come down later to balancing, and is it, too powerful or too much of a good thing?
Japanese flicks are cool and all, but bump logic will win out every time. Flicking carries an inherent risk, and any seasoned Blight player that actually uses their power in the chase will tell you firsthand just how unreliable flicking is against competent players. A survivor with good pathing and reactions will make flicking almost impossible, so you're pretty much forced to go for straight-on hits against these guys. In fact, from all the complaining that I've seen on YouTube, Reddit, the DBD forums, it almost seems like survivors want to play against Blights that bumped optimally and leave zero chance for counterplay, rather than taking risks in order to save time and rushes. The main reason that people have an issue with flicks is because of ignorance and a lack of understanding. Flicking opens up so much potential counterplay on both sides, and makes the chase that much more interactive and engaging. Again, if Blight couldn't flick, he'd just bump optimally every time, leaving zero chance for counterplay. The only thing that a survivor can do is hope that the Blight messes up. But if he decides to flick around here instead, then Lori, she can actually do something about it. This is why flicking is beneficial for survivors. It gives Blight another option that survivors can play around. And tell me it doesn't look hilarious to see the Blight miss a flick.
This is an interesting bit, because he's saying that J-flicks are actually inferior to playing Blight normally, which brings me a question, which is, well, why would Blights do it? And he mentioned earlier saving time and saving rush tokens, I guess if you're not running Alchemist's Ring. So obviously they want J-Flicks to punish noob survivors, which is, But then there was the point earlier where he was saying that Blights were J-Flicking competitive, which tells me that J-Flicks are landing against good players who know that they're gonna J-Flick, and they're landing anyways. So I'm still of the opinion, and this is where I would really like some more information of what the advantages of J-Flicking are, because I don't think it's so cut and dry as J-flicking hits bad survivors. Let's keep it in the game to hit bad survivors. Good survivors have nothing to worry about, and a normal blight 180 degree is more powerful. That part isn't quite making sense to me, and I would like some more information from Ascension because he does play more blight than me. He is better at me. He better than me at blight, and I would like to talk a little more about the advantages of J-flicking, especially concerned with good survivors, because this part just I feel like he knows, and it's just not making it into the video. But I'd really like to know that so that I can make a better decision for myself of whether, I think that having a 360 degree versus a 180 degree arc is just too powerful for Blight going down the road further in this discussion.
Think back to the first time you played against Huntress. Odds are, you probably got destroyed. Huntress plays different from most killers, and if you use the same tactics against her that you use against Myers, you're gonna have a bad time. Different killers have different counterplay, and Blight is no different. It's actually pathetic how easy it is to avoid a flick. Most people have never even gone up against a flicking Blight in the flesh, so of course they wouldn't know how to counter it their first time. They wouldn't know that a flicking Blight can be extremely predictable, and you can easily throw them off just by baiting out a flick and dodging to the side.
So he kind of touched on this point earlier, and I kind of talked about it, so I won't dwell on it too much. But again, maybe some players have a problem with adapting playstyles, and they want the same looping style to work against every killer. But for myself and the survivors I've played against and looped against and played with, I mean, that really hasn't been an issue. I haven't heard that as like I've never heard the complaint of, oh, I hate playing differently, and I haven't not learned how to play differently against different killer powers. And people do know how to play against Blight's power, and they do play differently. And the frustration from J flicking is when they get hit and they feel, or I should just say, I feel sometimes the hit was unfair because I knew how to play, I knew what his attack range should have been, and then I got hit with an attack that felt like just an exploit from a guy with a really good gamer chair.
I mean, it's not like flicking is some brain-dead technique like dead harding for distance or dropping pallets early. It takes a tremendous amount of skill to pull off consistently. It's not just throwing your mouse at high DPI, regardless of what some people in the community think.
I couldn't agree more, and having watched a video, like I said, I have been pretty convinced that J-flicking does take skill. Even, again, I'm going to come back to the, is it too powerful, but I do think it now that, it takes skill to know when to land it, to do it. And I think any frustration on Ascension's part of being accused of having no skill by anybody is a warranted frustration, and I think having watched this video, whatever you feel about the J-flick, or I feel about it, I don't think it's fair to say that a player who J-flicks is boosted or incompetent or anything like that, So let's just drop that argument once and for all.
Just because you can play him as an M1 killer with map mobility doesn't mean that he's easy. If you use his power everywhere but the chase, then I'm sorry to say, but you're a bad Blight. Bump logic is the true measure of a great Blight player. And in regards to flicks, well, flicks are nothing more than a tool in the chase that are only as reliable as survivors allow them to be. Case closed.
So I'm not quite so sure. Earlier he says J-flicks are hard to land, which they probably are. They save time, that you use a shortcut, but your best bet will be to not J-flick and to just play Blight normally. So if that's the case, I mean, people aren't going to lose much on J-flick. I'm left feeling uncertain of why a Blight player would want to J-flick. I really would like Ascension to talk more about the raw advantages and power it gives Blight, because I think that he would know it better than me, but I'll do my best to talk about the advantage it gives him and why I think it might be too much advantage. So, in any game where there's balancing of power, there's usually basically a utility versus raw power. So any character in a game, the more utility it has, like stuns, CC, and Blight's case mobility, the less power they have. So ideally, and while not all of DBD's killers follow this mentality, looking at you, Spirit, the more powerful you are in chase, the less powerful you should be with utility. A good example of a killer like that is Huntress. Very, very powerful in chase, if she's good with her hatchets, but she has low utility. The closest she has to cross map pressure, which is very map dependent, is if you can chuck a hatchet down range. And then that actually would be a very good example of a survivor allowing you to hit them, because if they're looking for the hatchet, they won't get hit by it. So she's very powerful in chase because she has low utility and low, I mean, she's a 110 movement speed killer. A good example of a well-balanced killer I really like is Demogorgon. He's got moderate chase power with his shred, and he has moderate map utility with his teleports. It's like a good balance of utility and chase power. He's not going to have a super crazy good chase power like, say, Deathslinger, which I think Deathslinger's gun is better than Demo's shreds objectively when it comes to chase power. But in return for that, Deathslinger doesn't have the map utility Demogorgon is. So this comes down to my concern with Blight's J-Flick and why I'm not sure that Blight should have too much chase power, because for better or for worse, his chase power has a huge utility in map pressure and mobility. It's very powerful. It lets you get around Peepo speed, and even without the J-Flick, even just with the normal intended power of 180 degrees of hitting anybody, it's still quite powerful in chase, especially once you know how to use it. And like I said, I'm not even the best Blight there is, but I've got a highlight reel of playing Blight normally with no J-Flicks, and there were some pretty sweet rushes. And that again is in addition to him having a huge mobility and huge utility from his power. So I don't want to see his power over-tuned in chase, because then I feel like he would become more closer to Spirit, who I feel really bad playing because she has a huge mobility and map pressure and chase power, and I don't think that's good game design. And someone says, well, we have Spirit, so why shouldn't Blight get closer to that level? And I would say, like we talked about Pig's hats, just because there's something that's already a little bit unbalanced doesn't mean I want to see more unbalanced things in a game. I would like to see less unbalanced things in a game, I mean, I'm just not sure, and this is really where it hits down. I'm just not sure if the J-Flick gives Blight too much oppression and chase. And he did mention they were using it in competitive, and it was landing against good survivors. And, if you have that gaming chair. But if we are going to keep the J-Flicks, and if it doesn't make him too powerful in chase, in addition to having a huge utility and mobility, I would like to see it to where it is no longer an exploit. They just rework it to say, okay, Blight now has a 360-degree death circle around him. Anyone can do it. An analog stick, a mouse with medium DPI, anyone. We should just move it away from an exploit and into the base kit if we're going to keep it. Which, again, I'm not sure we should. And this is really the major point, and I think it's my biggest concern, and it's the concern I felt was least addressed by Ascension's video, because he talks a lot, and I'm glad he does, about the disadvantages, the weaknesses, and the limitations of J-Flicking. But I would like to hear from him, because he's a better Blight than me, and because he is J-Flicking, what is this tool in his toolbox? What power does it give him? And is it too much? Can he get the same power and utility playing Blight as he can, or at least that balance dynamic, most of the killers on the roster? Or, is it too much of a good thing? Is it too powerful? Does it make him too good in chase and too good with utility? And there's also the question of, if it doesn't give him chasing power, why are survivors complaining about it if it only makes him weaker? And that part I don't really understand either, and I would like help understanding it. And if it is only giving away free hits that are guaranteed, why would a Blight who's able to J-Flick give up a free hit? Like, if you can get a free hit by bumping normally, why would you throw it away? I mean, he said to save time, but even as killer, I rarely save time. If I have a guaranteed hit, I usually go for it, especially with rushes. It's maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 seconds. It doesn't seem like a lot of time to gain for giving away a free hit, and which leads me to believe there must be some other power to the J-Flick. And I have experienced it as a survivor where I've gotten hit around walls where I thought it was safe, and especially with that element of surprise, which, like I said earlier, would go away if it had the controls adapted to every console and every mouse. So I've talked a bit, but in conclusion, I just want to come back to this one major question I have is, how powerful does it make Blight? And does it make him too powerful given how much utility and map pressure he already has? And yeah, but thank you for watching the video. If you watched it, this is a really long one. It's pretty self-indulgent, definitely, to talk a lot about something that is important to me, but I know that, you know, it's a long time to sit through, and I tried to make it shorter, but it was hard to do it without covering all the bases. And I really appreciate you guys, all, I assume 3 of you, and yeah, I'd love to hear what anyone else thinks about the J-Flick 2 in the comments, even if you haven't made it this far, and hopefully we can come to some sort of conclusion.
Oh, no time.
Just gonna hit you.
No. Oh, this one is slow. No.
Just going for the achievement.
Nope.
It's also wasting time.
I'm out of here,
Go
dude.
for it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's time to get to the...
I think actually.
He doesn't.
No.
Where'd you go?
Back towards the door. Cool.
You did.
But did I really lose? Because I feel like I won a moral victory there in the end. I'm not sure about you guys.